Right, Ed. First question, really. Very intrigued by your book. Why Socialism is Sexy Now. Great title. Tell us more.
Okay, so it's part of the series of books actually that I'm planning to do called Basic Socialism. And the first one I thought we have to talk about why socialism is popular now in this day and age, really. And it's basically a sort of normal view of socialism, not overly inflated by economic theory or philosophical theory, and not entrenched in the history of Russia and China and all the negative connotations that socialism has with it. And I just wanted to talk in a normal way to normal people about what actually socialism means, without all of the, as they say these days, hyperbole.
Yeah. Why do you think socialism has become so much more popular today?
I think just since the 2008 financial crisis, I think a lot of it stems from Occupy, actually. That people have, we were all told we're in this together, we're all going to make cuts together. And that hasn't been the case. The 8 richest men in the world own most of the wealth in the world. They're all white white upper class males, the majority of them. And the people that are suffering at the bottom are the 99%. Those two labels of people still ring true today. I think that's one thing that Occupy really secured, was differentiating the difference between who's got the money and who hasn't, the haves and the have-nots, as I say in my book, really. And I think people are waking up and realizing that capitalism isn't the way it has to be. One of the books that I really like that sort of inspired me with this was a guy called Mark Fisher, who reads a lot of the famous Slovenian philosopher Zizek, the guy you've probably seen on TV with a big beard, a really thick Eastern accent. But he's famous for saying people could see the end of the world rather than the end of capitalism, which is for this day and age, it's quite a sad thing to hear. So I think we need to start talking about what different modes of production and different sort of economies could look like to actually work for people rather than the 1%.
And what for you, Ed? If we had a socialist government, what would you like to see change?
Well, I think if you think about our economy now, it's very individualistic, it's very materialistic. I mean, people buy brands, bags off of eBay to look good. And I think that's a mentality that comes with this capitalist system. And I think that come around not over just one government. I think it come around from Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And I think it was carried on by New Labour over 30 odd years. So I think if I would see a socialist government do one thing, it would be to try and change that narrative so that future governments could carry on that narrative and change the way we live as a society and the way that we operate as an economy and as a country. And I think the UK is long overdue with that respect.
And if there was to be a Corbyn government in England, what do you think the manifesto and him and the party offers? What's the future for England under a Corbyn government, do you think?
I think sorting out the NHS. I worked in the NHS for over 10 years as a psychiatric nurse and as an auxiliary nurse. I managed to get my nursing education paid for by the NHS. So I would think that needs to be reinstated. I think nursing bursaries are a must. I think we're running short on nurses. We used to be able to pinch them from the EU. That's not going to be such an attractive avenue. And I think the NHS was sort of deconstructed by New Labour. They said that it was going to be for competition and being effective, where different companies have to bid to run services in areas. This is why Richard Branson, or one of the reasons why Richard Branson, Virgin Care, has been bidding for different services, and it's been failing all over the place. And I think trying to run a service like a business is the worst thing that you can do. I spent over 10 years working in various NHS hospitals, different settings, mental health, general health, community. And I worked with a lot of older, experienced nurses who were managers, and they were used to managing teams of nurses, dealing with complex situations, dealing with relatives that were anxious. But because of the change in the culture of the NHS into a business, they have to spend more of their time appeasing the managers, appeasing the financial tick boxes, if you will. And I just think it's a waste of resources, and it just doesn't give good value for money like we were sold it would. And I think it needs to all be completely flattened. And I think the whole NHS needs to be built up from the start again, really. And I think Labour did that in the first place. And I think Labour can do that again.
You were working in mental health. From your experiences then, and from what you hear with maybe colleagues in England at the moment, what needs to change in NHS for the mental health for the future?
I think resources. I mean, the amount of beds, I don't have the figures on me now, but the amount of beds is ridiculous. The amount that have been closed. I mean, they send people to private beds that are run by different companies like the Priory, and they charge the NHS astronomical amounts for sending people miles away to a bed. Those beds, people should be able to get beds in their home counties. I think it's criminal that we send people away so far where they've got no friends or family and no support, which is, one of the things that you need around you in times of crisis. Another thing as well, I think it goes beyond the NHS and is more of a Western society-based thing, is the use of antidepressants and one-size-fits-all therapy. You tell the government that it's a good investment and that it's effective, and they will put lots of money into it, like they have done with cognitive behavioural therapy and antidepressants. But whilst those there is lots of very good evidence for these therapies and these treatments, they don't fit everybody. And the people that are really suffering, so those therapies needs to be, there needs to be more options for people. But also there needs to be a weight lifted off of the community mental health nurses who have caseloads of patients who they're meant to see between once or twice a week. And that these are people with chronic schizophrenia that need to have injections at home, and their attention is so thinly spread that they would probably love to give more care and attention to these people, but they can't because they've got so many other things to do. And I think one of those things is bureaucracy, which I'm sure any nurse will tell you, no matter what area they work in, they do spend a lot of time doing paperwork, and it is often taking away time from patients, which is where nurses should be looking after patients, not filling out paperwork.
Would you correlate some mental health problems to capitalism?
Oh, 100%, yes. There's, as I mentioned, Mark Fisher earlier, he's quite prolific in the sense that he talks about, the teenagers in his college classes were just not interested in life. They're more interested in sort of social media and things. And I think you see that today. People are not just teenagers, but generally the majority of people that have grown up in a sort of Western capitalist neoliberal society are sort of judging each other. The first question they might ask is, "What do you do for a living?" It might seem like something small, it might seem like a small conversation piece, but maybe it would be more interesting to say, "Oh, what's your favourite hobby?" Whereas we judge people by what jobs they do, and how much money they make, and what shoes they wear, and what watch they wear, and what model iPhone they have. And socialists are just as guilty as anyone of this. But we live in a capitalist society. We've been brought up in that manner, and it does affect your mentality. It was only a couple of years ago that I sort of really got out of having to have the latest iPhone, because I do love technology, and it's not saying in a social society we won't love technology, won't have these things, but I do think in a socialist society we can be a lot less materialistic, a lot more empathetic, and we can try and make the world a lot more equal place, which is, I think, the thing that I talk about most in my book, or one of the things that I sort of woke up more to writing about it was equality. Equality, but not just equality in the sort of social mobility sense that if you're really talented and you really can make money, then you can get a better life. I think that's sort of sold to people in an individualistic sort of liberal dream, because we can't all be like Alan Sugar coming from a council estate to running The Apprentice. Most people that go to private schools end up in high-profile jobs like journalism, being judges, being politicians, and that really needs to change. And I think true equality needs to come about in our society, and to change things, we need to start challenging the narrative that it doesn't matter whether you have Nike trainers on, you can be all right with some shoes you bought from Asda, and it doesn't matter. No one cares, and you're not a lesser human being for wearing different trainers to your friend. And I think, equality mixes in with this narrative of materialism and individualistic achievement. So I think that's something that really needs to be addressed.
Now, you are the chair of Labour International in Madrid. Could you, I think it's very interesting because you've been living in Madrid the last 2 years or so.
Yeah.
What's happening in Spain and Madrid with regards to the politics? How are things there?
Okay, so a few things there. Labour International is a constituency Labour party that went from sort of being a sort of thing in the south of Spain, in the south of France, that had about 700 people. And then we had Jeremy Corbyn. The membership has now gone up to 3,300. It's one of the biggest constituency Labour parties in the Labour Party. Now, we don't have an MP. We don't have an MP in Parliament because people that do vote, that still have the right to vote, vote in their home county where they're from. And so we are basically a constituency party that doesn't have an MP, but we do have all the other structure the same as a constituency party. And last year at conference, we brought forward, or we were one of the people that brought forward, open selection for MPs. So that is something we are allowed to do. We are allowed to bring conference motions forward. And it's basically anyone that's a member of the Labour Party that lives abroad can be a temporary or permanent member of a branch, as in you would have in any constituency party. And we meet up once a month. We have meetings, and we also have online all members meetings. We have different campaigns for different things. We try to get people abroad to register to vote. That's the main thing that's going on at the moment. We're actually in Madrid. We're planning to go to the big Rastro, which is a big famous market in the centre of Madrid on a Sunday. And we're just going to go with a Labour sign, and we're going to tell people how to register to vote, whether they be tourists, whether they be British immigrants living abroad. And so it's a focal point basically for any Labour supporters living abroad. and then we've got branches all over the world. The other day I was chatting to someone from New York about my book, and at the weekend just passed, we had the parliamentary, it's Partido Socialista Europa or something like that. It's the European Socialist Bloc. So all the socialist parties from all over Europe are affiliated to this bloc, which is in the European Union. Another part of it's called S&D, the Socialists and Democrats, and they are preparing for the up-and-coming European elections. And I went to the Congress, and me and several other members of Labour International were lucky enough to meet Jeremy Corbyn on a rooftop just after his interview, which was very nice. He seemed, a very humble human being, and wish we had more time to talk to him. And then later on, we went to see the Spanish Prime Minister, who is currently Pedro Sanchez. He is the Prime Minister and the head of, or the leader of PSOE, which is PSOE, which is Partido Socialista Obreras España, which is like the Socialist Workers' Party of Spain. They've sort of haven't recovered from their New Labour era, if I'm honest. They were sort of taken to the right, and they were in a similar situation to New Labour, where they didn't actually cause the financial crisis in 2008, but they were in government when it happened, and they did very little to sort of recover from that. And they sort of stayed in the centre, and they're polling about sort of 29% at the moment. And they have moved a little bit more to the left. They have tried to put through quite a good sort of budget for social social measures, like they tried to increase minimum wage. They've lifted a tax off of green energy. Solar energy was heavily taxed in Spain. One of the countries with some of the most, some of the loveliest sun in the world. And I think they've done a bit, but they haven't done enough to hope. I don't think they're going to win the next election, because they managed to get in office because of a vote of no confidence. Because several years ago there wasn't a majority in Parliament, so they worked with the other more left-wing group Podemos and the Catalan separatists to overthrow the what they call the Popular Party, which is the Spanish version of the Conservatives. And in that time, they've had a very slim majority, and they've managed to pass a few things, but sort of nothing significant really. And at the moment, Spain is rife with nationalism because of the Catalonia crisis. So in Madrid, you can see in certain sort of popular right-wing upper class neighborhoods, there's the buildings used to be white, now they're red and yellow because they're just adorned with Spanish flags from balconies. Nationalism has been really high in the last 2 years, but it's not nationalism in the sort of aggressive sense. It's more like nationalism in the football sense. But it's just lots of people in Madrid are very anti-Catalan, or they're just very pro-Spanish. It's not so much about being anti-Catalan, but sometimes more about being pro-Spanish. I think austerity really does make people sort of fall back on, national identity because of times of hardship. The other thing that's sort of taken Spain by storm at the moment is the refugee crisis, which the European Union haven't addressed. And sadly, at the weekend, while I was at this sort of European Socialist Congress, there was two things that weren't mentioned, and one was the refugee crisis. It was barely mentioned, and the other thing that wasn't mentioned was around the corner from the Reina Sofia Museum, that was where the Congress was being held, was a load of evictions going on, people being kicked out their houses by bouncers. And there was a 3-row deep riot police there, stopping protesters from trying to stop these evictions taking place. And, there was no mention of that at the Congress either. As for the Socialist Parliamentary European Party, their manifesto was very lukewarm. It was very socially democrat. There was lots of talk of helping people and helping workers' rights, but there was no actual substance behind it, really. There was a few people mentioned anti-austerity, but they're still clinging on to this idea of anti-austerity. And austerity hasn't worked. It's actually made things worse. In the UK, the national debt is just gone astronomical, and that's what I argue for in my book. So apart from talking about what really means to be a socialist, I also argue the fact that we need to stop sort of appeasing capitalism and start criticizing it, and that's what democratic socialism does. It not only criticizes capitalism, but it sort of holds it to its word, and it pushes a bit further to try and take away the capitalist power, which we all know is massive and huge.
Now, a couple of years ago, Podemos were doing exciting things. I think Momentum sort of looked at them and went, "Wow, let's copy that." How is Podemos today?
Unfortunately, there's been a split. Pablo Iglesias, who's their very sort of enthusiastic leader, they call him the professor with a ponytail in the UK tabloids, he is continuing as leader. And he had a bit of a crisis. About 3 months ago, he bought a very expensive mansion in the mountains of Madrid. Now, how much of that was spun by the media, I'm not sure. But the fact that he bought a house with his wife, who is also a MP in Podemos, really sort of affected their relationship with the public, I think. And the other thing is, they've had a lot of negative press over the last couple of years, basically painting them as communists and saying that they want to do all matter of things. But recently, his sort of second in command, he looks a little bit like a younger version of Owen Jones, if you could look any younger than Owen Jones, is sort of, they say he's got more of the mastermind behind Podemos. He has recently had a bit of a controversy with Pablo Iglesias. He's sort of remained a member of Podemos, but he's also working with the Madrid mayor, who is a woman called Carmena. They call her the grandmother of Madrid. She is a left-wing mayor that was elected a number of years ago on a coalition platform with Podemos. And now she's currently running for the same position, but on her own platform, not in coalition with Podemos. And Errejón has gone over to her to work with her. They're saying that they can provide, both for young and old in Madrid. And Carmena has done, very, very well in this city. She's publicised the festivals more. She's made the sidewalks bigger. She's made the centre of Madrid finally have something similar to the London congestion charge that hasn't come into full effect yet. She hosted one of the first international prides a couple of years ago. And she's also sort of taken on a level of financial sort of responsibility. She's cut down the deficit of Madrid City Council, which isn't a normal left-wing thing to do, but I think she was sort of showing that she can be financially responsible, but also do good things in the city. She obviously has her critics, as any left-wing mayor of a capital city would do. And they're critics of the left and of the right, but she is running with Errejón for this position, and Podemos are contesting it as well. So that sort of caused a bit of a split in Podemos, as far as I'm aware. But other than that, I'm not sure where they stand with regards to the recent snap general elections that have been called for the country. But it's quite clear that whatever happens, there's going to be a coalition. Vox are a very right-wing party. They're very sort of anti-abortion, anti-immigration. They recently won 12 seats in Andalusia, which has been socialist held since the fall of Franco, and they're working in coalition there with the sort of PP, which is the Conservatives, and another party called Ciudadanos, which stands for Citizens, they're a right-wing party, but they sort of try to paint themselves as a little bit more liberal. And they are working together in Andalusia. So if that is going to tell us the things to come in the general election, then Spain could be going rightward. And Spain has recently been hailed as an area that the right wing sort of haven't become popular, and as also a country for European, more European integration. Whereas if Vox, PP, and Ciudadanos get in as a right wing coalition government, then we could be moving away from the progress that Spain has made since the fall of Franco. Corruption has got a big thing to play for that. There's a lot of distrust in politicians in Spain.
When is the election?
I think it's the 28th or 29th of April. They always have their elections on a Sunday in Spain, I believe. So, no, Saturday, sorry. But they always have it at the weekend so more people can vote, which makes more sense. But after that, then we have the local, the regional, and the European elections as well. So lots of elections to look forward to in Spain.
Big year for Spain. And your book at the moment, people can download it for free for the next 5 days.
Yeah, so there's four more days left. I've got a copy here. It's on the Kindle. It's on the Kindle store. It's free for the next till Saturday, and I just want people to download it, read it, and give me your opinion. Maybe it's quite a short book. It's only 140 odd pages, and as I said, it's not filled with sort of over the top jargon and theory. It's sort of my own thoughts and thoughts from other popular books that I've read put together to talk about why it's popular now and where we can go in the future. And I hope if it's popular to do another edition of maybe the future of socialism or the history of socialism. But yes,
when you were writing it, what were the big things that came out for you?
I think really equality, how central it should be to socialism. But also, what makes socialism different from liberals and conservatives is that it does critique capitalism. It holds it to account for what it's done and what it wants to do. Whereas conservatives, we all know, not love capitalism, but they're willing to embrace it. They think it's the natural order of things, probably because it's working in their favour. Maybe it's not, I'm not sure. But the majority of capitalists are not for state-controlled economies, or even partially state-controlled economies. That is unless, the banks needed a massive bailout like they did in 2008, 2009, 2010. That's obvious that the state is allowed to control the economy a bit then because they don't want to lose all their money, which, is one of the biggest criticisms that I really found whilst writing this book. Just how socialism is different, and that's why it's a big hope for people. Ed Miliband, who's not the most famous of socialists, but did actually say, as long as there's capitalism, there will be socialism. And I think that's something that sort of resonated with me really, and just for the pure fact that. We do need to talk about what it means to be a socialist and where we're going with socialism as well. What form does it need to take in the future? The left was always the party of the future, the party of utopia, the party of ideas. It was always the ideology of the future, how we can improve the world for everybody in an equality sense. And I think the left has really lost that. I think it is coming back under Corbyn, but it's more like we're trying to fix the past, all the things that the capitalists have done bad, but we also need to start talking about what we're going to do in the future. You know, with regards to automation, with regards to 4-day weeks. I mean, it's not such a big thing, is it, to work 4 days a week and have a 3-day weekend? I mean, I think most people would agree that you would definitely get a better quality of life. But you need to make sure that people are paid the same, which, you know, where basic universal income comes in. I mean, President Nixon put forward a bill for possible basic income back when he was president. So, you know, they were talking about it then in the States. We've moved on a lot since then. So maybe we need to start talking about these things again. I think one thing that the media has managed to do quite well is sort of lump liberals with socialists as all do-gooders, when actually I think there's a big difference between the two, because liberals don't really hold capitalists to account. They want to let capitalists get on with it and make sure everyone else is sort of all right, which, you know, we've been trying since the you know, New Labour was sort of, well, they're neoliberalists, aren't they? And you know, New Labour did do some good things. They brought a minimum wage. They did do some good things, but for that amount of time in government, they didn't do enough. And you know, they also set, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about the NHS. They set the way forward for privatisation of the NHS. And I spoke to some sort of more New Labour members in the past, and they sort of, but we put loads of money into the NHS. And I think they just don't get their head around that it's not all about money. It's about structure. It's about how things are run. It's about, you know, not trying to make money out of public services. And I think that's another thing that my book sort of talks about, really, that, you know, services are for people, not for shareholders.
And on that excellent point, Ed, I'll say thank you very much. That's great.
Thanks very much.